Welcome to Petronoia, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the energy debate. Hosted by Dan Romito, this show takes complex energy issues, strips away the agendas, and delivers clear fact-based insights. Whether you're an industry expert or simply looking for a balanced perspective, Petronoia brings clarity to the conversation. Each episode, Dan breaks down key topics, from U.S. energy independence to global policy impacts, focusing on the facts rather than the rhetoric, helping listeners make sense of the energy landscape. This is Petronoia, where we separate fact from fiction to fuel-informed discussions.
Welcome to Petronoia. I'm your host, Dan Romito. I don't know if this is a good thing to admit, but I've been doing a ton of internet creeping, looking for guests who can speak specifically on the topics that keep coming up with our prior guests. Did some internet sleuth work, came across Ron Vokoun, Vokoun, like snow cone. I keep screwing that up. I'm sorry, my friend. He is not only incredibly savvy and knowledgeable on the data center industry, he probably has like the coolest title that I've come across, SVP of Data Center Cooling. Ron, I really appreciate the time. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Before we get into it, would love to give you the opportunity for you to provide the audience with your background. How did you get into the mix? How does one become the SVP of Data Center Cooling? And we'll take it from there.
Well, thanks for having me on, Dan. And it's been a long, winding road. That's
It sounds like it.
Yeah. Like you said, I'm Ron Vokoun, Senior Vice President of SVL Data Center Cooling. I recently joined SVL. Actually, it's been about a week. A company with almost 60 years of success in HVAC and mission critical infrastructure. So SVL Data Center Cooling builds on that legacy. We deliver innovative, efficient cooling solutions designed specifically for the data center space. So I was drawn to SVL because of their forward-thinking mindset and strong commitment to client success. We continually find a way to say yes, which is pretty unique in this industry. And I'm excited to be part of the team that's not just following the trends of the data center industry, but actively shaping them. And a little background on me. I have been in construction for 38 years with all but a couple of those years dedicated to digital infrastructure. So got into telecom back in 92, did my first data center around 97, been involved in it ever since. So just live and breathe the industry, read all there is to read about it. And as you've seen, I share a little bit of it on social media and try to make sure I'm up on the latest, greatest.
Yeah, I mean, what drawn me to reaching out to you was the predictions blog that you do. And once again, at the end, like I want you guys to promote that because I was drawn to it right away. It had some fascinating predictions. It was very well thought out. It wasn't corny. Like some of these things you see are just like so stupid and annoying. One of the things, well, there's many things that popped up, but the first thing that really drew my eye was I think everyone is on the same page in terms of like nuclear provides this future potential in terms of like addressing all the power that we're going to need. But everyone says, at a minimum 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, everyone's very bearish in terms of the timeline associated with getting nuclear to a place where we need it. You went Oppo. Now, I don't think you went Oppo for the sake of going Oppo, but you are very bullish on the time horizon, particularly with SMR. So can you just break that down for us? Like you said that it's closer to 5 years than 10 years. Would love for you to break down the rationale behind that thinking.
And I said it even before the change in administration. So that was probably a really good pick.
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, in those data center and tech predictions, I try to take on things I really have no business talking about, this being one of them. But I've been making predictions about nuclear for probably 5 years. And I think the foundation of it all is simply that it's the only reasonable answer to the radical shift, just the power draws that AI is requiring. We'll talk more about natural gas, I'm sure, but nuclear is going to be the final solution because it can scale so quickly and it is a great base load, but it's also zero carbon, at least from an operational standpoint. So it's really the only answer. So I think it's got to be the solution. But the other thing I've seen is that there's so much money wants to get into the data center space. Then if they can't find a way into the data center space proper, they're going to find problems that they can get behind that'll help stir on the data center industry. So you'll see that in a lot of the funding behind some of these startup small modular reactor companies and a lot of the natural gas behind the meter power production folks. There's just money piling in behind the things that prop up the data center space. So, but SMRs are so flexible. They're not the big 20-year development process that everyone's used to. And I think that's probably why people are thinking 10 years. And I may be wrong. It may still turn out to be that. But I believe that there's enough money behind this, enough momentum behind this. And people are really looking at AI as a national security issue, which, regardless of your political views, I do think it is. So if we don't keep ourselves in the front, you can guess who will be in front, and they're not always our friends. So I think the country's really getting behind that as a driver. And I think eventually that's going to knock some of the roadblocks out of the way. But, certainly there's people, I like the term, the acronym FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Everyone thinks about the 3 Mile Island. SMRs are not your grandfather's nuclear.
Right. Not even our grandfathers. Like, everyone associates nuclear with like what the intro to The Simpsons, like Homer Simpson driving from the plant with like the rod in his pants. And it's like, no. Like the technology, which I love your take. And I cut you off. I apologize, but I want you to go back to what I think you're going to say. I think the old school Homer Simpson nuclear is associated with the older generation, and what I found in several of these conversations are saying the same thing. The younger generation, particularly younger people associated with environmental NGOs, look at SMR and nuclear in a different perspective, right? Not the same technology. And whereas the old timers are a little bit more anti-nuclear, the youngins, as we like to call them, are certainly very pro-nuclear. That obviously is something, not obviously, but that's something that seems to be factored in within your analysis.
Absolutely. And I think to try to head off some of the NIMBYism, the data center industry has run into this, and SMRs are going to as well. They need to get out and educate the public on why they are different from 3 Mile Island and Fukushima, because they're so radically different. At the Data Center World Conference that's what would have been April of 2024, a company called Last Energy trucked up an SMR on a flatbed. It was more of a skeleton of it, but pulled out a crane and hung the thing up in front of the conference. It was awesome. And then I think they rented a vacant lot, and it's been sitting on that lot for over a year, just with a sign up saying this is a nuclear power plant. Those kinds of punching people in the face with the information, I think, are good. But education is going to be such a big part, because these aren't going to be centralized. They're going to be very distributed, and people are generally going to freak out.
Yeah. And so, like, what's interesting too is, like, it's funny to me because natural gas, as you highlighted, has some of the same, let's call it impediments, obstacles. Like, it's very associated, as it should be, with the fossil fuel industry. And there's like this AI juxtaposition, which says, we love AI. It's super awesome. It's going to change everything, the way that we do everything. But at the same time, we love emissions management. We want to decarbonize. And then you have this weird thing where natural gas is a decarbonizing agent. Nuclear certainly is, but they're like, whoa. Like, we don't want that. And like, wrap my head around this, or help me explain this. Like, from a data center operator perspective, do they really care like what the source is, or are they more concerned with just how are we going to power this thing? How are we going to meet this demand? Like, what's the mindset or the strategic mindset that goes into selecting energy source?
I would say for the names that everyone knows, they absolutely care. And whether they...
You mean the tech... I refer to them as the tech bros. Like, we just lovingly don't say names. We just say generalization of the tech bros.
Yeah. All the big names absolutely care. And I can't speak to whether they did at the beginning or not, but in the early days of when cloud computing really started blowing up, as much as I maybe didn't love the way they did it, Greenpeace had an impact. They did what I would call the name and shame campaign, and every year have a list of, they had a different name for it every year on how dirty is your cloud and all these things, but it really brought a lot of visibility to how much power the industry was using. And back then it was using a fraction of what it is now. And they really helped change behaviors. And now every year, the 4 or 5 largest purchasers and developers of renewable energy globally are the big tech companies. So they're doing it, they're committed to it. And regardless now of what the administration is saying or pushing, you can see they're still funding wind farms and solar farms, and there are a lot of the funding behind SMRs. So they are 100% committed to it. And even getting down further in the supply chain, all the large colo providers are the same way. They're all fully committed to it. Now you've got the business aspect. You could be a purist and say, I'm only going to use renewable energy, and you're going to forego so much business that is out there right now, which is driving natural gas. And as much as I would love everything to be driven by renewable energy, there's some obvious challenges associated with the intermittency of it. And certainly natural gas is a whole lot less carbon intensive than coal. So it's a great way to prop up the business, keep it growing at the rate that it wants to grow, and enable SMRs to mature and get into place. And when I even talk about natural gas being temporary, we're still talking about a lot of these plants are being set up for 3 to 5 years. So it's a fairly long-term solution.
One of the best analogies I've come across, I was having this conversation, and I'm going to give credit to myself. Someone was talking about, like, they use the same term of bridge, like this notion of bridge, and people usually associate bridge with like relatively short term. And the analogy that I made was like back in the 80s. I'm a huge basketball fan. Like, you had Moses Malone and Charles Barkley. Like, Moses Malone was like this seasoned vet, like knew the NBA game, obviously was still very talented, got the job done. The team relied on him as the leader. But then you had like this young, spunky Charles Barkley, and we all know Charles Barkley probably much more than we do Moses Malone. But people fail to remember that like Moses Malone mentored Barkley for like a good 4 or 5 years. And that's sort of the analogy that I make, is natural gas is Moses Malone, like this very wise, seasoned vet who understands the business and how to get through it and can navigate the young rookie. And SMRs are Charles Barkley, like this very up and coming, spunky rookie that, one day is going to be amazing. Like, I was sort of laughing at it with my head, but my analogy probably holds true to what you're saying, right? Like, natural gas is this bridge, but it's not like this bridge that we're going to rely upon for, a couple years. Like, am I wrong in thinking that there's first of all, I think there is a permanency to natural gas, but this bridge is going to be a really long bridge. It's not something that's going to be addressed in short term.
It's not something that's taking you over the railroad tracks. It's kind of like that 9-mile bridge heading to Key West.
Right. Yeah. It's not the bridge in Stand By Me that they're dodging the train, right? It's that key. I like that analogy as well. What do you think that does to the natural gas market? Right. I think the market is coming to terms with, hey, like, we can't be as anti-fossil fuel as we had hoped to be because we need natural gas. But do you see the market coming to terms with the reliance on natural gas, and what is that doing to market dynamics?
I think obviously there's some people that are happy with it, but I have seen it fully embraced. I started getting calls close to 2 years ago now, people talking about this. And now the conversations I'm having with people, they're talking about their pipeline, and for the other reasons, I can't name names, NDAs, seriously. But I've talked to one company that they've got 7-8 sites, over 10 gigawatts in production right now, in process and various stages of permitting. So it's not dream-a-watts and brag-a-watts. It's happening because there's money there to drive it. And some of these energy developers are buying land directly adjacent to where they're building the plants, and they sell that to the data center providers. So it's
interesting. So there you have energy providers front running the data centers, knowing that the tech bros are going to build their data center there. So they're gobbling up the real estate.
Yep, absolutely. Because if you can find,
it's kind of a jerk move, but it's also kind of genius.
Yeah. I mean, by building power on one piece of property, you're making the other one worth probably 4 times as much. So it's a really smart investment.
Yeah. I mean, you have this whole thing going on, man. Like we were talking about this with another guest. It's like this balance is going to be really, really interesting. Like on one hand, you have this land grab, but you have to go where there's available land, which is predominantly rural areas. And the irony of those rural areas is they don't have the infrastructure or the transmission that you otherwise would get in more developed areas of the country. And then because it's rural, these people have been so used to paying relatively lower rates. When Joe Data Center comes in and sucks up all the juice, then it becomes a political issue because ratepayers are going to go to their respective representative and being like, what the hell? My bill is double, triple, maybe even quadruple. Like, once again, am I off my rocker with sort of my forecast, or is that sort of what you're seeing in the market?
I'm going to say it depends. It depends on where you are. And certainly the market that has had the most issues is Northern Virginia, because it's the largest data center market in the world by manyfold. And there's been some power challenges out there. So what I've seen a lot of states focusing on recently is passing laws to ensure that the cost of those transmission lines and the substations and all the things that enable data centers, that those costs are going to the data center providers themselves, not to you and I and every other customer.
Right.
And from what I can see, that those big tech pros do not have any problem with that. They are willing to pay their freight and are trying to shirk that responsibility. So everyone that thinks they are, I'm not seeing that. They're playing by the rules that are in front of them. And if the rules are that you pay your full freight, they're going to do it. There's money to be made. They have no problem with that. So I think that's smart of the different counties and states that are getting ahead of that. But some, I think, were already set up such that from the first dot-com boom back in the early 2000s, where there were some of the same issues, some of them learned their lesson and have that in place already. So I think at the end of the day, your typical ratepayer is not going to see much of a change, and the data centers are going to pay for everything they're using. So I don't see that being a problem, but it could be in certain areas that don't get ahead of it.
Do you think that's sort of influencing to sort of the rise of behind the meter and off the grid? Like, is that just a capability that they want just in case?
I think that they're doing that just as a means to keep the business going. Again, there's such incredible demand right now, and the grid is failing. The grid was failing before ChatGPT came out. This is not a new thing. And I like regulation, but it shouldn't take 10 years to get approval to lay a couple 100 miles of transmission line. And then you combine that with the amazing inefficiencies of the grid. And I've heard numbers as much as 50 to 60% of the power that goes into the grid is lost due to the inefficiencies of the grid. So if we had a more efficient grid, I've read from several people that if we could clean up the inefficiencies, or say we could miracle in a brand new grid, which obviously isn't going to happen, but if we could, that there would be enough power production now. If that were all going, if that was 100% being used, there wouldn't be any power problems. We wouldn't need to do all the SMRs and all of this natural gas. There's no power being produced. It's just being lost along the way. So going behind the meter solves a couple of things. One, the power is being produced where you're going to use it, or at least closer. So you've got kind of a direct access, but you're also not losing all of that power to the grid. So it's more efficient use of the power that's being produced.
And then so instead of SVP of data center cooling, we make you Supreme Commander for the day, Supreme Commander Ron. Outside of the regulation, which I agree with you, like the bureaucracy that's holding us back while China just does their thing, is that the bureaucracy in of itself, by definition, would be a national security concern. But what would you do? Like, how do you remedy that? If there's enough power being generated today, but we're losing a lot of it because of inefficiencies, like what do we do?
I do think the answer is where the data center industry is going, is distributed generation, because when you look at,
And real quick for the layman, distributed generation alludes to what?
putting these, instead of having one monster power plant like a big coal belching plant, or maybe Palo Verde, the big nuclear plant outside of Phoenix, Arizona,
Right.
you have a bunch of smaller ones that can handle a load wherever those loads tend to be. Because if you're looking at new transmission lines, you've got to go across someone's land. Unless you're replacing all of the wires on the existing towers, you're going to need more land. And that alone, that the eminent domain, and those are bad words. If I was a farmer and I lost a bunch of land because someone just took it from me, I'd probably be a little pissed off too. So I get that. And distributed generation does not require all of the transmission. There may be some distribution lines. You know, I've heard of some talk of a few major plants down in the Abilene area for a couple of major data center developments there. And there may be a couple of miles to 10 miles instead of 500 miles of transmission. So you eliminate that part, and you're also using the power either at or very near where it's going to be produced. So those eliminate so many of the challenges, whether it's environmentally or NIMBY, all the above. So I
mean, even federal versus state, right? Doesn't that presumably give the states more power to do whatever they want to do? So like you can have California stay crazy. I don't know where you're from originally, so but I hope it's not California. Or is California do their thing and Texas do their thing?
Well, that's the thing. Everyone does it differently. So I grew up in Nebraska. I currently live in Iowa.
That's right.
Lived 26 other places in between, including California. And I remember a project I was on having to not being able to build part of this project because of coastal sagebrush. So
What is coastal sagebrush?
Not that far. And heaven forbid the swallows set up shop in your formwork, you're not going to be able to pour any concrete for a while. So, you know, I get both sides, but Texas is the Wild West, as it always has been and always will be. So it's going to be, you're going to see so much natural gas power generation down there, and therefore data centers, because they are pro energy. They've got natural gas down there because of all the wellheads. You've got a ton in Oklahoma. So those places are going to go nuts with data centers because they won't regulate it as much. And, you know, it's a good data center market anyway. So there's people will go where the power is, period.
Yeah. No. And then bringing it back to infrastructure, one of the things that you wrote about, and I felt like an idiot, so I had to chat GPT this, but direct to chip liquid cooling. It sounds like something straight out of Skynet and like Terminator, but this actually is a pretty influential component about bringing it back to states, which states will obviously do whatever they want to do. And it ties in with global supply chain and infrastructure. This is not a term I had heard, like direct to chip liquid cooling. And I would imagine just because of your title, you are an expert on this. So what the hell is it, and why is it important?
Well, it's really just an evolution. So much of my career, the average rack density, a rack just being a rack full of computer equipment, it has typically been in the 2 kilowatts, then it went to 5, maybe 7 kilowatts a rack. Then I started inching up a little bit. But when AI came to be, now we're talking about 50 kilowatts per rack, very commonplace. 100, the next generation of NVIDIA chips. I've heard talk of 600 kW per rack.
So just wait, how long ago was it, like 2 or 5?
It was probably 5 kW, less than 10 years ago. And
so in a decade, it's gone from 5 to 600?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say when did ChatGPT come out? Like 2.5 years ago?
Yeah, like 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, I would say the average density was probably around 10 or 12 then. So,
wow.
I mean, ChatGPT and therefore AI tipped the industry over, because I can think of a lot of different technologies when they came out you just thought that's going to be really cool when it really works and when it's mature. ChatGPT came out, and therefore I look at that as the coming out of AI, that it worked. It worked right away. It had some quirks to it. Certainly it's, you got a ChatGPT trying to talk a New York Times reporter into divorcing his wife. So that was a little weird.
My son is, he's going to kill me for admitting this, but his buddies don't watch it. He has his like little girlfriend, right? And he wanted to break up and he didn't know how to do it. So he asked ChatGPT to draft a text that would break up with her, but in a way that would be friendly and not offensive. And so we saw the text because we can obviously monitor his text. And I'm like, there was no way in hell you wrote this. Like, how did you do this? I couldn't even talk to you. He's like, I wrote it on ChatGPT. I'm like, oh my God, man. Like, what the hell?
There are so many applications. My wife used it we did a long weekend for our anniversary in 2024 to Savannah. She got on ChatGPT, had a little conversation with it. It spit out an awesome 4-day weekend in Savannah. The only thing we didn't do was we couldn't get into some of the restaurants. It was a great vacation. There are so many ways to use it. You can use it for ideation, to get over writer's block. Who knows? I mean, and people will continue to find ways to use it as it becomes more efficient and the cost comes down. And here I go going down a rabbit hole that I love.
No. I have to ask, are you a big fan? Like one of the ladies that I work with is deathly afraid of ChatGPT. She thinks that like AI is going to take over the world and we're going to live once again, like in the scenario, like laid out in Terminator 2. Yeah. I don't think it's like that big of a deal. Like I think, people were probably freaking out when the horse and buggy was replaced and then the railroad came about. Obviously these capabilities are much more elaborate. But I don't view AI as the end of the world. It definitely needs guardrails. It has the potential to do that. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to think that more pragmatic minds would prevail and put in the necessary guardrails.
Yeah. I think there's enough focus on that now. People are aware. I mean, a lot of technology advances have been driven by sci-fi movies for when I was younger, and I've heard that from the tech founders. So I think there's enough focus. It can be prevented, and it will. Certainly there's the potential there, and people also worry about the job loss. But if you look back at every major tech jump, everyone thought cloud computing was going to replace data centers.
Right.
Well, guess what? Guess where the cloud lives? A data center, just someone else. Yeah. And all of them end up producing net way more jobs. AI will be the same. There's going to be some transition period, and people are going to have to be flexible. But I think back to a futurist that I saw at a company conference back in 2006, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And he said that by the time kids are getting out of college, they need to prepare for 5 different careers, not jobs, careers. And so we've all got to be flexible in our thinking because things are changing way faster. But at the end of the day, the technology, when people adapt, there will be more jobs and it'll be a better situation than we were all in before. But there's always a transition that people are not comfortable with.
One of the other things on the topic of technology, like you triggered me on another thing that you wrote, and I'm going to butcher this because I don't know what I'm talking about. You talk about the difference of sodium-based batteries with lithium-ion. I obviously know what lithium-ion is because I have kids, and every freaking toy that they have requires now a lithium-ion battery. But you get into this argument, or actually this perspective of the rise of sodium-based batteries, energy storage, and renewables. When I hear renewables, I almost look at it as mutually exclusive from data center powering. I don't think I certainly don't think we're there now, and we won't be there for quite a while, where renewables can be considered a base load. It's a nice in between. But up until reading your stuff, I had not seen anyone necessarily put sodium-based batteries against lithium-ion within the context of energy storage and renewables, talking about data centers. So that is a really long-winded way of saying, I have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to that stuff. I need you to clarify it for me.
Well, that's one of those things I'm not sure I know what I'm talking about. Well, I'm pretty sure I don't know what I'm talking about, but I read enough to know that there's just a lot of different technologies coming into the energy storage space. And so in the time since I wrote that, I've read about 2 or 3 other technologies that half of them I can't pronounce. So I think people are always looking for a better mousetrap, especially in data centers. Every square foot of data center under roof is very valuable, and you want to have servers there, not have a bunch of batteries there or anything other power related. So you're finding things produced more modularly, containerized. So you build the data center and you bolt these things on the back of the building and connect them. So it's a lot more of that. But the different technologies are all focused on either having a higher capacity for storing power. So whether it's weight, which certainly the lithium-ion is way lighter than lead acid, but all the new technologies maybe have a smaller footprint, maybe are lighter or some combination thereof, and can store more power for that space or for that weight. So but you are seeing for renewable energy, more and more of the projects are rolling out with the acronym BESS, Battery Energy Storage Systems, but
Okay.
glorious name for a bunch of containers full of batteries that
Right.
can help ride out when the sun goes down, help the solar plant ride out the night. And the same kind of thing with wind farms, although I live in Iowa and the wind never stops blowing here. So I don't, that's an issue here, but so much technology and it's chasing the money that's in the industry.
So real quick, I've read a stat, and we put this in our own presentation, that about 40% of the electricity that a data center requires goes to cooling. Like you're Mr. Cooling. Are we entering a place where renewable technology can begin to be relied upon to cool data centers, or is that just something that's a little bit more down the line?
Well, right now it's power's power. You don't generally have, well, if you have a microgrid, usually not multiple sources of power coming into a data center. So we'll assume that hopefully we have a low carbon power source that's feeding the data center campus. So what you're referring to is, and I give the Green Grid folks, they came out with the term PUE and it's advanced past that, but basically
PUE.
Yep, power utilization effectiveness. And so
Okay.
the goal would be to have a PUE of 1.0, which means every watt that goes in there is used for compute, not for cooling, not for lighting. As we know, that's not possible.
Right.
But back then, I think when that metric first came out, the average data center, the PUE was either 1.8 or 2.0, which means for every watt that's being used for compute, there's a whole other watt being used for lighting, power, anything other than compute.
And when did that metric come out? How old? Like, what's the?
Oh goodness, I can't remember. Over 10 years ago.
10 years. Okay, so it's been around.
And all the guys you're calling the tech pros have really attacked that efficiency metric. And so I think that the average right now is probably under 1.5. So for every watt that's used, there's a half a watt used, but that's still, a third inefficient. But you look at the big tech pros, you've got data centers that are down around 1.05, 1.07. So,
and what are they doing? Like, is there a technological differentiator that would allow them to do that?
Yeah, and it's things that everyone can have now. That they're cooling equipment, the electrical equipment, all of the UPSs are so much more efficient. It used to be there'd be a 20-30% power loss going through a converter for a UPS, and then storing that in a battery, and then you'd also have very inefficient cooling equipment. Now there's been such a drive for energy efficiency that we've taken, and I would say with data center PUEs being down as low as they are now, a lot of that low-hanging fruit is taken up now. The really efficient cooling systems, liquid cooling, going back to your earlier question, liquid is always more efficient at cooling than air is. So going to more liquid-cooled systems is going to inherently help things. Even the air systems, though, have become way more efficient. So now I think the next frontier is going to be making the IT equipment more energy efficient, because although they're using a lot of power, they're putting off a lot of heat, which shows me there's inefficiencies there. And so
Yeah.
Greenpeace shine the light on the inefficiencies. We've got a lot of that taken care of in the infrastructure. Now I think the IT equipment's got to get more efficient. So, but yeah, we sell incredibly efficient cooling equipment, and that's all contributed to the PUE coming down and less inefficiency in the data center on the whole.
Do you think there's some regional components to consider? I mean, I look at more like, to your point, like Iowa, a lot of open land, a little bit more, a little bit easier to work with politically, probably. I'm making the assumption there. But then you look at like, let's just pick on California because it's easy, like LA. Actually, bad example. Anywhere outside of LA, like regulatory environment, and then just not a lot of land. Like you have all these other efficiency, quote unquote, measures. Like, do you see like data centers becoming much more clustered? Because right now they seem to be everywhere. But how does the regional component play into like how the strategic selection of a data center site?
I think it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves, because right now they are going everywhere, and I think that's going to continue because of power availability. It used to be site selection criteria would be a very long list of probably 5 to 10 have-to-haves they thought, and here's a lot of other nice-to-haves. But right now, I'll give an example. So back in around 2018, a gentleman hit me up on LinkedIn. We had a conversation. And he said, I've got this.
I wasn't the first, Ron? Damn it. Okay.
No, you were.
You would already be conditioned for some jackass to hit you up on LinkedIn, so that's good. Okay.
You didn't believe the stuff people asked me on LinkedIn. I won't even go into it. It takes several beers to get through that. But
yeah, another podcast in itself.
Yeah. He said, I've got all this land, all this power out near Lubbock, Texas. Is anyone going to be interested? I'm like, no. They want power, but they also want fiber, and they want to be near a major airport so that techs can fly in from Silicon Valley, and on and on and on. Now, right now, all that matters is power. If you can prove that you really have power, and what that means, I'm not quite sure. I think you probably would need to have a substation in place, because all those power people in Northern Virginia, that they all had letters from Dominion Energy saying that they had power coming until they didn't.
Yeah.
So I think you probably need to have physical evidence, but if you've got power and one of the big tech pros finds out about that, you're going to be rich.
Isn't there like this thing, like I think of the utility company, I think of like green shag carpeting, like that wood paneling, like I think, I just think of like old and I think of old and antiquated and just stubborn. The role of the utility, they probably have to get their act together, right? Like where are they in the mix on this?
They're starting to figure it out. And I think you could probably blame the data center industry for not reaching out to them, but it was long ago, there wasn't a problem. So yeah, and you say, hey, I need this much power here. And they say, sure, was oversimplifying, which I love to do, but that was generally how it went. But now that it is so much more scarce, there are more conversations happening between the two, and that's who needs to be talking. There was a new conference recently that I wasn't able to make, but I looked at the speakers. Half of them were data center people, and the other half were utilities. That's where the discussion needs to be had, and it's starting to happen. But a lot of these utilities, some are on board and trying to figure it out, and some are just trying to figure out what's happening to them. So it needs to get better, but there needs to be communication and collaboration, and that's
is there a regional component to that, or is that do you think that there's certain areas of the United States that are more prone to having like the green shag carpeting utility, or it's just sort of all over the place?
I think in generally probably the areas that haven't been big data center hubs are the ones having to figure it out. But I see some adjusting really quick. We talked about before Indiana, for example. Yeah. Indiana was not on the radar screen of the data center world. And over the last 2 years, you got some more on the Chicago side of Indiana. And now you've got Jeffersonville, Indiana, right across the river from Louisville. Yeah, you're going to see some stuff going in around Indianapolis. So obviously they have power, and someone figured out here we need to do this to attract these data centers. So you're seeing them pop up in all kinds of strange places, and other places that figured it out early that are rural, Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon. They were really early movers in, I'll say, the rural market. There's gigawatts of data centers, and where I live, there's over a gigawatt of operational data centers in the Des Moines area. No one knows about it because they're out in the cornfield, but they've got power. Hasn't affected our electric rates. I mean, mine are pretty cheap. So some people have figured it out. Western North Carolina, same thing. They lost a lot of the textile markets back in probably the 80s, and they made a big push for data centers probably 10, 15 years ago that have been really successful. So another great success story of a place that was very depressed. And although data centers don't bring a lot of jobs, the jobs they do bring are really high end and pay a lot. So
Right.
and that attracted more of an ecosystem out there. So that's another great success story from the industry.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily thinking that Jeffersonville, Indiana is like this technology hub, but it sounds like all these little towns are popping up. It's interesting. Like we look at the CBRE report. CBRE does a really good job, and I don't like a free CBRE t-shirt. I don't really know anyone that works there. But they go through exactly this analysis of like what is constraining certain locales from job growth. And for the last, I think it's 3 years, it might be 4, but it's certainly the last 3 years, it's access to power. And what I don't understand, like I would read that and be like, okay, like how do we get more power and wherever we want to go? Is that you made an interesting comment. You said it's sort of on the data centers, it's sort of the data center's fault for not telling the utility. But why is it the data center's fault?
Well, when these folks are looking at different areas, a lot of times they'll either work behind a different developer or create an LLC with some funny name, and they're negotiating incentives with the state all under a different name. I can think of one specific situation. They were talking to Nebraska.
Okay.
They didn't know who they were dealing with until one of them popped open their laptop and there was one of their company stickers on the back. And that's how they've been dealing with them for 6 months and didn't know who they were. So we're secretive. And certainly if you're a landowner and you know that you're talking to one of these tech pros, you're going to charge them more. They know that. So that's why they do it. But you've got already a better way to collaborate with the energy provider or bring your own energy, which leads to the natural gas discussion we've been having and eventually SMRs.
Yeah. So what do you think the energy supply, like I knew that we were inefficient in terms of the distribution of energy. Like I didn't know it was like to that extent, but when you talk about the need to power AI, one of the things we haven't talked about is what's going on in China. And I think you were alluding to them earlier by calling them the other guys. Like China has put up 10, 12, whatever it is, nuclear facilities, I think in the last 12 months. Now, what's fascinating is we had a nuclear scientist on yesterday, and he made a really good point. He was like, look, just because they're putting up nuclear facilities, number one, doesn't mean that they're doing it correctly. Number two, doesn't necessarily mean that they're abiding by a level or a high level of standards that, it won't come back to bite them in the not too distant future. And number three, it's China, so they're probably lying about it anyway, or to a certain extent, they're full of crap. Do you feel that the United States, irregardless of all what I just said, like, do you feel that the United States is behind schedule relative to how we're seeing the rest of our competitors integrate more power into their economy?
I would say power in general, maybe, but not that far because of natural gas. We can roll that out fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. And I also think that we're not behind. Again, from a power standpoint, we may be a little bit, but tech on the whole, no, because we're inventing it. Everyone else is trying to catch up with us on the technology front. And that's not to say if we can't get the power we need, we could fall behind. And that's a very real risk.
Yeah.
So we need to figure out the power aspect, and I think we are. But tech on whole, I don't think we're behind. Power, I think we're a little behind, but I think we have the ability to catch up. And we have the ability to do that without forsaking the safeguards. We don't need to get rid of all the regulation. We shouldn't get rid of all the regulation, because some people are so driven by the almighty dollar, they probably will do the wrong thing. So we can do it the right way. It's going to be a little more of a challenge, but we can do it and we can keep up because we are the leaders in tech. But we can, that can change. I will never say that can't change. It could probably change faster than I think.
Right. So that said, like you brought up some really good points. You went from being very bullish to somewhat cynical back to being very bullish. Like what are some of the things, like what are some of the things that really give you heartache? Like what are some of the things that the heartburn kicks in when it comes across your desk?
When people, I'll just say those people that when they lump all technology, all power together, not to keep.
I know who you're talking about.
Fukushima is not going to happen to a small modular reactor. But again, that comes back to the SMR makers. They need to educate the public. If they don't, it may take 10 years. If they focus on that, it won't take as long, because people will realize there's such radical differences behind how the old school nuclear plants work and the brand new ones. And if you realize that, and I'm not saying everyone needs to be a nuclear scientist, I certainly don't have the brain power to do that, but there's some very simple nuances that once you understand them, you're like, okay, that's not so bad. Let's do that. And it's zero carbon. There's a lot of benefits to this. And there's the national security implications of staying ahead in AI. So there's been some really interesting studies that I read recently on the perception of data centers nationally. One of them was made by, I think it was Modine, a cooling equipment manufacturer. And they did a national study, and I think it said 70% of the country, that, assuming that it was statistically relevant, which I believe it was, said that 70% of the country has a favorable view of data centers. They realized that a lot of what we do, and probably even more than they realize, goes through a data center. So people are grasping that finally. And once you grasp that, then you can make the connection to the power, because so many people for so long didn't realize that all the crazy things that they were doing on their phone were coming through a data center. I've got a brother-in-law that's a little older than me. And when we were talking about the cloud, he's like, isn't this going to kill your business? I said, Mike, it's just someone else's data center.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like the cloud is the cloud, but it's not necessary. It's still tangible in many ways.
Dollar builder for that guy is still a data center. And so it's education. There's so much to that.
Do you think there's a company out there on the SMR side that's doing a really good job of educating the public, or is this something that the broader sector or industry just needs to prove upon across the board?
I think the industry on the whole needs to do better, but Oklo, I think it's pronounced Oklo.
Yep.
They are one of the big ones that I think the tech companies have invested heavily in. I see them at a lot of different conferences. I think they're trying. I think Last Energy was a company that rolled that SMR, a micro modular reactor, up to data center world in 2024. Element has done they've done a pretty good job as well. I like those folks. So there's far more than that. Those are the ones just on the top of my head, but they're the ones getting themselves out there, taking their lumps, trying to educate the public, because initially it's people are going to be chasing you with pitchforks because they don't understand.
Yeah. So we're having this conversation in 5 years, right? What are some of the things that we overblew? What are some of the things that we thought were going to be like this immense problem that we sort of, in retrospect, we're like, yeah, it wasn't that big of a deal. And what are some of the things that we are underestimating that if we don't act right, it could really come back to bite us?
The thing that I'm most impressed by is the safety of these SMRs. Most of the designs, that the part that I can understand is what happens to prevent something overheating to do a 3 Mile Island. And most of that, when there's any kind of a failure, it's kind of like failing open or failing close, using a kind of a controls term. These fail into a safe mode. So they drop into whatever cooling fluid, or molten salt. There's whatever their safe spot is, that's where it fails. So if anything goes wrong, it instantly flips itself off into the fail safe mode. And so, and that obviously wasn't the case in Chernobyl, wasn't the case, or the 3 Mile Island. So I think the safety is what it's what people need to understand to push this forward. But hanging out with some people far smarter than I do that have a nuclear background have said that these things are very safe. And we've been operating with these kinds of things in nuclear subs for a long, long time.
Right.
There's,
Yeah.
a couple hundred people sitting in these metal tubes under the ocean running around with them. So it's the same kind of a situation. We need to show people it's safe. So I think that's very overblown. And, what are we not paying enough attention to? I don't know what that is yet. There probably is something, but I haven't seen it. And so I think that as education, both of the regulating entities and the public get better, these will get easier to roll out. And once that happens, we're going to be off to the races with carbon-free power and doing as much compute as we want to do.
Yeah, it's very well said. I think it's one of those things. Once again, you go down the checklist. You're like, do you like AI? It's like, yeah, ChatGPT, as we outlined, it can help you break up with your 5th grade girlfriend, and it can help you be more efficient in your job. Like, yeah, dude. And there's so many other stories. My other son is using ChatGPT to try to figure out some untapped gambling algorithm that makes him win his buddy's fantasy football league, and it's a whole other story. But on the checklist, yes, let's just call it much more efficient. For the people that are really gung-ho about decarbonization, which frankly should be everybody, but obviously there's a spectrum that exists. Like, check the box. Environmental footprint, like we've done, analysis after analysis and presentation after presentation, that if you want a wind farm, it takes about 26 acres per gigawatt, right? That's the land that you need. Solar is like 3 to 5. Nuclear is 0.06 acres per gigawatt. Like it's not even close. The 100%. Dr. Scott Tinker puts it so much more eloquent than I. He utilizes the analogy between kale and a burger to describe the concept of density. On the component of modularity, right? You're not necessarily going to pick up a coal-fired power plant and just move it to another part of the country. It doesn't work like that. In terms of price, like we're getting to a place where like this stuff is actually pretty affordable. But then you use the term nuclear. People are like, yeah, but Chernobyl. It's like, dude, that miniseries on HBO did such a disservice to the broader community, because number one, that was obviously 35 years ago, whenever it was, like when the technology was in its relative infancy. Oh, by the way, it was in Russia, where they don't necessarily have the same journalistic standards that we have here, right? Like, at least so. And then when the Fukushima thing came up, Rob Hayes, he's the nuclear scientist that we had the other day, just completely debunked every sort of myth associated with it. I can't envision a scenario where the general public doesn't come around. And because of the economics associated with power, I think that the tech bros in particular are just going to start buying these things like it's going out of style.
Yeah.
What I can't figure out is like, what am I missing? Like, it can't be all too good to be true. Like, what is this missing component that we're going to look back and be like, oh man, how did we not see that coming? And so far, no one's really said anything.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges is that the designs. I won't say the technology is there, but not everyone has a fully functioning prototype. And we still have to go through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to licensees, which we should, because
right. But I've heard dealing with them, like after you're probably not going to send them a Christmas card after dealing with those people.
I think they're getting better. I think they're maybe like the utilities, that they're realizing this is the future.
And NRC has green shack carpeting too.
Yeah, they may. Sounds like the family cabin.
Yeah, exactly. Creepy cab.
But you're right. They've only been exposed to these great big, gigawatt plus plants that take 15 years to build, and now they're wrapping their minds around what these smaller things are. And I think they're starting to get on board. They're working through the national labs, like the Oak Ridge National Lab. They've got a bridge right now to bring an SMR down. I can't remember who it's with, but so I think they're starting to get on board. So
yeah,
I think they know they have to, otherwise there won't be any nuclear plants. And if that happens, they won't have jobs. So,
right. Well said. Yeah. It all comes back down to economics. Where can people find your stuff? Like, once again, I give the plug, because like I said, as creepy as it is to admit that you're searching for someone on the internet, and I hate when I put it like that. I came across your stuff and I was like, man, I got to get this guy on the show. So give the plug. Where can people find your stuff?
Well, for the company, our website is svldcc.com. So that's the company website. And then for me personally, LinkedIn, always good. I read as much as I can about the industry every morning, and share everything I think's worth sharing. And same thing on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, Twitter. And it's simply my name, Ron Vokoun, Vokoun. But just trying to share everything that's worth reading in the data center world. There's a lot of good content out there, and I'm trying to absorb it all and spread the gospel of the data center world.
I love it. Before I let you go, man, any good Twitter wars that you've been on?
Oh, what's that stuff?
What's the best one? I hear Twitter. I am not on Twitter. Dan Pickering is on Twitter. He loves it, but then, and I actually think he gets a little pissed off at me when I call it a toilet. It is, but like, he's gotten on some pretty good Twitter spats. Like, I always have to ask for a Twitter guy. Any good spats that you've had recently?
I haven't been a part of any. I was in some years ago with some coal people having a sustainability discussion, but I'm not going to go any further without.
Yeah.
Completely off topic. And college football, you will see some stupid stuff about college football on there. Being from Nebraska, that was all there was growing up back when we were young. And boy, so you get a Husker fan debating the Big Ten with USC. Woo, look out.
Yeah, it gets pretty I mean, it could be, how to bake cookies, like any topic. There's always going to be like some troll that does it. But yeah, man, I can't believe
soda. Come on.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. This was super helpful. I can't believe that we crushed an hour on this one. I would recommend anyone go and look at Ron's stuff. It's great. Ron, thank you so much for joining, man. I can't wait for the next one.
Oh, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it, and come back anytime. And if anyone wants to talk about the market, please give me a shout, and we'll just keep pushing forward and evangelizing the right thing to do.
Appreciate that. Talk soon, Ron.
All right. Take care.